Hello and welcome. Today we are looking at this mini-itx board from ASRock. It is a perfect board for smaller builds such as this one and this one. It is their B550M-ITX/AC. It allows you to use Zen 2 and up-and-coming Zen 3 processors. So anything from the 3000 and 4000/5000, depending on what the number they're going for, CPUs that are coming out. You cannot run the 3000 APUs because they're actually Zen Plus. This has currently got a 4350G in it, which is a Zen 2 APU. We'll have a look at that in another video, but I've been quite impressed with what a £100 CPU from AMD can do at the moment. And we'll have a quicker look at its features, the ports and various things that are available, and then we'll have a look at the BIOS settings, have a dig around in there and go through each setting individually so you can see what's available and what's not. We'll then load it up into Windows and have a look at some quick benchmarks of what's available on here. I've only got a slower M2 SSD, but we can still see if it performs well enough. And we'll have a look at the software that comes bundled with the motherboard to see if it is any use to you and if it can actually offer anything above and beyond what the BIOS offers. So let's have a closer look then, shall we? Okay, so here we have the board. We have obviously the CPU and RAM already installed. I've had to tie the CPU cable up, which is a bit of a pain. I like to wrap it around the fan, but the way this board is set up, you can't have the fan on the other way around because it will block off one of the RAM slots at the bottom, so it's a bit tight, which is a shame. But different fans and heat sinks, you'll probably be able to do what you need, but this is the one that came with the CPU, so it's what I got. So down here we have the X16 PCI Express slot. It is Gen 3 or Gen 4, depending on what CPU you have installed. With the CPU I have installed at the moment, it is Gen 3, which is fine for what I'm going to be using it for. If you want to use Gen 4, you're going to need a Zen 3 CPU or one of the standard CPUs from Zen 2. Those will give you access to PCI Express 4. Don't know any cards that need it at the moment because most of them, well, it's more bound to the games than the cards, but you should be fine. But anyway, let's carry on. We have 2 RAM slots which take up to 64 gig of RAM. Currently got 16 installed. On the back we have 1 HDMI, 1 DisplayPort, 2 USB 3.2 Gen 1, 2 USB 2, 1 PS2 port, another USB 3.2 Gen 1. We also have a USB 3.2 Gen 1 with a Type-C connector. This is just a normal USB port. This isn't Thunderbolt, so you can't use it for a monitor or anything like that. It's not hooked into the PCI Express lane. We also have Gigabit Ethernet, standard audio, and the Wi-Fi. Now the Wi-Fi card can actually be removed. It is in the vertical M2 slot, key to E. It needs to be unscrewed from the bottom, then it can actually be removed. You can then use this slot for other things. It is a PCI Express X1 slot, I believe PCI Express Gen 2. Let's have a closer look at these ports and connectors. We have a case fan / water pump connector. We have 2 LED headers, one is addressable if you're into that kind of thing. Down here we have the standard power. We have 4 SATA 3 ports which can be RAIDed. You just need to set up disk. We have a USB 3 header, 1 USB 2 header. We have another case fan and water pump. We have the BIOS reset and the power switch reset buttons, LED reset for up here. Now over the other side we have, at the back, we have this PC speaker, and we also have the HD audio header. So a bit of an odd place for it, but I suppose it makes sense next to the audio card. Over here we have another port. I have no idea what this does. It is not mentioned in documentation. I suspect it's some kind of debug port. I have no idea what it does. If anyone knows, let me know, because I'm quite interested in what it's for. I guess that's all the ports looked at, so let's boot this up and have a look at what the BIOS has to offer, shall we? Let's have a look at this BIOS in more detail then, shall we? Here's the main screen. It shows you the BIOS version, the processor type, speed, any microcode updates, and how much RAM. We are currently using version 1 of the BIOS. There is a version 1.1 which I have not updated to as of yet. It allows for support for up and coming processors and contains a patch. I haven't installed that just yet. I need to have a look into that. But this is using the basic version, which if you buy a board today you will end up with. I only have 16 gigabytes of RAM installed. In earlier videos showing this board I had 32 installed. It can take up to 64. The reason why I've got 16 installed is because that's what this machine is going to be using going forward, and I had it in there to show a limitation of the BIOS, which I'll get to in a moment. So let's go to the next screen. So we've got the, in fact, we'll come back to OC in a moment. We've got the advanced settings, which is always useful. We've got CPU configuration, which allows you to enable and disable any kind of settings on the CPU itself. So various things can be turned off. I'll just scroll through them. If you're familiar with Intel stuff, this is going to be very foreign to you. But if you're used to digging around in here, you can have various settings and fiddle around. So you can use this to turn on security settings if required. That's for AMD's TPM, which I think is only available in the Pro CPUs. So this is available for this particular CPU. If you had the standard 4300, I don't think this setting would be available. In here are the onboard settings. So you can enable LEDs on S5 sleep state. There are LED headers, which we looked at a moment ago. So basically what this means is when the machine goes to sleep, it will keep the LEDs on. So you get this constant lighting when in sleep mode. Now we do have some extra management features. So we have virtualization for cards that support it. These are mainly for network adapters that I've discovered, so this is more of a business type thing. It's more for virtual machines, so that can pass through the PCI Express directly into the virtual machine, rather than having to do some kind of like strange emulated hardware and that kind of thing. So useful for servers and that kind of thing. So it'd be nice to see graphics cards start using that feature, but it's kind of limited to more business sector stuff. So we got obviously HD audio, which you must leave on auto, front panel. So of course if you want to force HD audio you can. Restore and power loss, I normally have this turned off because normally you find the machine turns on for no reason. Onboard Wi-Fi and Bluetooth, turn it on and off if you wish. So auto is quite useful because it will keep it off when not in use and turn it on when in use. More power saving than anything, but if you're having issues, just enable it. I've currently got it set to auto because I do use a Bluetooth mouse, and I've had no issues with the auto killing itself while in use, so it seems to work quite well on this. Onboard LAN, if you're using it, keep it on. PS2 Y cable. That's only if you're using, let's say you want to have a PS2 mouse and keyboard. You can have that set to auto enable, but leave it on auto. You shouldn't notice a difference regardless of setting, but if you're having issues, enable it. We've got, now to set up the RAID, you will need to use the CD that came with the motherboard. It supports RAID 0, RAID 1 and RAID 10. It's for the SATA ports and the M2 slot. Don't know how well it would work combining a SATA and an M2 drive together, but this option is available apparently. I'm not going to be looking at this today because I only really have one hard drive installed. So currently we only have one SSD installed. So it's the 1 terabyte drive that I normally use for storing games and stuff on. but you have, we don't want to be erasing that today, so let's just go back. It's only for the paranoid of you out there, but it's nice to have that in the BIOS. And we've got the same with the NVM. It's we can format it or just do none. It's exactly the same as the secure erase tool, really. Instant flash is for the BIOS. Limitation with this though, the USB stick you put in must be in FAT32. I have tried exFAT, it couldn't find the BIOS file. And I tried NTFS and a few other things and couldn't find it. So USB stick, FAT32, you should be fine. We can try that. We'll flash this at the end to see how the process goes, because I do need to flash this anyway. Now the hardware monitor, your typical hardware monitor. I have no chassis fans plugged in at the moment because it is currently on the workbench and nothing. It's just open top. CPU temperature is pretty stable. Motherboard temperature. The way the VRM cooling is, it's all quite well set up, so that shouldn't be a problem. You have various preset modes. So the most interesting one will probably be customization. We've got choice of input devices, so we don't have access to any other sensors, just motherboard and CPU, which is pretty normal. Some motherboards have temperature sensors. Now here I've managed to pretty much, you can set it to any temperature you want, so it doesn't seem to care. So set that to 0, you can set it for that. Set it to 100 degrees, it doesn't seem to care. The highest you can go, I don't really know. 100 is the highest you can go. Okay, so you don't really want to be setting that high because that's just not good for your CPU. So we set 35. So you can set the temperature. So this fan speed should be 0 when it's at or below this temperature. I've had mixed results for this. So if I put it up to 50, it seems to take effect immediately. So let's put it to 100 actually. Set all these to 0. Now at this point the fan should go down to nothing, as in just go to 0, but it always hovers around the 500 mark. Now with other ASRock boards I find that it does go to 0 and sits there until needed, but for whatever reason this board doesn't seem to handle that very well. So I've been leaving it at the silent mode, which gives me what I kind of want, but it has a bit better than some boards. It has 4 levels, so you can set, let's say, set it to 35 degrees. You want it to be 0. It's not 35. At let's say 50 degrees, you want it to work at about 50%. At 60 degrees, you want to go to 70%, let's say, and then at 70 degrees, you want to be at 100. And you can set the critical temperature to be, let's say, like 85. At which point the system will forcibly shut itself down to protect anything, but there is a built-in fail-safe inside the CPU as well. In the fan configuration we get a cinema setup, so we can tell what the CPU fan is. Is it set up as a fan or set up as a water pump, which gives you various settings. I mean, it depends on what kind of pump you have. Some have to require a actual constant speed, some allow for PMW. Depends what kind of pump you've purchased. So it's nice to see the fact that we can control this if required, and you can set it to whatever you wish, CPU or motherboard again. But we have set it up for a fan, so we haven't got it set for anything, nothing plugged in. But it is nice to see like that, and you can also put a water pump on fan 2, which is always useful. I mean, not everyone has 2 water pumps in their system, but it's not bad to have a fallback. You have the same settings. We have standard performance, silence, customize, which gives you the same 4 levels. And then same here again. So same level of control. So in security, we have your typical security, which is stuff like supervisor password, user password, so allow people to log in to the BIOS or actually log into the system. We also have access to secure boot, which I have turned off at the moment. Reason why it's off is when it's on, It does limit what you can install, such as some versions of Linux don't install with secure boot enabled. And you can have various settings here for secure boot keys, which is useful if you're doing something a bit more advanced. For the average user, you don't have to worry about this. But for anyone that needs it, there is the settings. Let's not do that. Boot manager, typical boot manager. It's currently set to the Windows boot manager on the M2 SSD. Of course, you could have anything else you wish. You got boot from LAN, fast boot, which is always useful. I've got that turned off because just because I find fast boot I don't really need it. And there isn't, CMS is disabled, and you have your typical save settings at the end and boot override, which is always helpful. Now let's go back to the OC settings, the overclocking settings, because this is where this board is different from most cheaper boards and where it would differ from the more expensive boards. This is where it is most limited. Here we have the storage configuration. You can set it up to be RAID, which you'll need to configure the RAID, or HACI or auto. There is no IDE mode. I suspect auto may do that. Set up hot pluggable. Wouldn't recommend it unless you need it if you're using it as a server, but it is available. It doesn't really specify which ones become hot pluggable, but hot pluggable is hot pluggable. If you need it, you need it. You don't, you don't. Here's our NVMe controller. That's currently SSD installed, so it's 256. And there's no SATA, and then the M2 port also supports SATA, so that's why it's not showing up there. So let's go back. Now we have the ACPI settings. So we have the suspend to RAM function, which is set to auto, which you can turn off if you don't need it. Deep sleep I have disabled, but you can enable S5 or S4 and S5. I don't normally use deep sleep, but it's useful to know that this board supports it and it works. Wake up from PS2 keyboard in S4 and S5, useful, but depends how you want your things set up. I always have all these turned off because I don't want the machine waking up unless I press the button. Wake up from PCI Express devices, that's mainly for network cards. Your graphics card won't be waking up your machine. And alarms, so you can enable them, which allows you to set a custom one. So you've got a schedule thing to, you want your machine to turn on before you get to work or something, or the OS can control it. Once again, disabled. I don't want the machine waking up for no reason. TMP devices, trusted computing. It's currently enabled because it is available with this CPU. But you can, but interestingly, no security device found. Let's go back a second. Trusted computing, useful if you've got a TPM device. This is for BitLocker and that kind of thing. It's currently enabled. This is a Pro CPU. It comes with security features anyway, but there is no TPM enabled, so there's nothing here to really see. But if you need it, the settings are there. AMD PBS. This is more for the stuff linked to the CPU directly. So we have, here's the current firmware, if that's of use. You can't do anything here other than view it, and as you can see, it doesn't quite fit on the screen, but useful if you need to debug anything. So let's go back. We've got the graphics feature. Now this is where, I like this pad, so you can pick to default graphics, which would be the iGPU or the external graphics. I'm currently running off internal graphics at the moment, but it's set to external because I pop in a card in and out. It's just basically which one is going to fall to be your primary graphics. You might as well leave it as external, because if there's no external card, it falls back, which is better than some boards where you have to either clear the BIOS or mess around with it. Now, you can configure the PCI express lanes. Now, since there's only one slot, not entirely sure what this is for. But yeah, just leave it at 16 for this particular board, unless there's a particular reason why you can do that. I know there's other things you can do, but I'm not entirely sure what that is for. RAID mode with the NVMe. There's only one M2 slot, so unless you have an extra card, you can't do anything with that. Now here's where you can, I believe, adjust the voltage of the I would say chipset, but I'm not entirely sure. Because VDCR would be CPU voltage, but then that's clearly socket. Well, anyway, if you need it, it's there. PCI Express, please, you can change it or force it to be anything you wish. I'll leave it as auto, but you can force it to be Gen 3 if you wish. Same with the PCI Express lead speed, you can force it to be Gen 1, Gen 2 or Gen 3. I'll leave it as auto because I swap things in and out a lot and it's nice not to fiddle around with it. You can also adjust, I believe that is for the Wi-Fi card, so you can adjust that as well to be PCI Express or PCI Express 2, depending if you're wishing to swap anything out of there. So let's go back. Let's get a look at CBS first. We got the common options, which is we got turbo boost, you can disable that, or you got the C state, which you can enable or turn off. But I suppose depending on it's more for power saving, so I'll leave that off for now because it can affect some results. Now we've got memory addressing, which you can mess around if need be. It's very best to leave it at auto, but I'll just show these for anyone that needs something like this. So we can mapping is generally not that important, but some people need it, especially if you're doing certain things. Memory encryption, if you need it. This board does support, yes, so this supports ECC RAM. So you might, if you're using this for a server, you may want to encrypt your RAM as well as having the error correction. Memory clear. Now with these, this is getting deeper into the things that most people never need. So I'm just going to, and honestly, I don't always remember what they all do. So here's the, we can fill around with things. We've got CPU mode, AP mode, or out mode. Not entirely sure what out mode does, but of course, have a play if you need anything. Hash bank, most of these things should be left as auto, unless you have a actual reason to deal with it. Once again, it's all to do with memory, so don't mess if you don't need to. Now here's why I have 16 gig installed. No, I didn't want to do that. Oops. So let's look at audio configuration in a second. You can adjust anything with the audio controller if you wish. If you have a particular requirement, there are some settings in here. Now, graphics card configuration. Now, this is important if you're using the internal graphics. By default, it's set to auto, so as you can see, it's hidden the ability to assign how much memory. You can of course disable it if you want to. You have auto mode, which kind of tries to work out what you're trying to do, so you can select your resolution. And you've got game optimizer, which always seems to assign 4 GB of RAM. So if you want a bit more control, you need to go to specified and you need to choose how much RAM. Now if you wish to go to 16 gig, that won't work because that's all my RAM. You need to have at least 32 gig of RAM. I've currently got it set to 4 gig, which is, you know, I haven't, with games that require more than 4 gig of video memory, the GPU isn't strong enough to run anyway, so 4 gig is enough. It might change in the future, but that's what I've left it as. Now, you can also change some of the settings with the UEFI BIOS, and which default page you start with. Let's have a look at the overclocking settings. you get the typical, if you mess around with it, clear off. It's not our fault. Now you can overclock the iGPU, so you can increase its frequency or its voltage. We might have a look at that later, but only do that if you want to get a bit more performance out of it. It's also, can you put negative in? No, you can't. So you can't underclock, which is a shame. And that is just to enable or disable some overclocking settings. So, okay, so that's for the iGPU. Now, of course, now if you want to look at the normal overclocking settings, which are over here, we have the we can set the adjust the boost frequency. So let's say we want to go to 4000. It should allow it. You can mess around with the core voltage. Now here we go. I'm about to say you can adjust the voltage here if you wish. I would have to look up what they are. Same with, can you offer offset? No, it doesn't seem to offer an offset. So here you can mess around with the voltages. Obviously double check what your voltages are before you go in to play around in here. But it's nice the fact you can use this to stabilize your overclock or to optimize the current voltage for the current speed and save a bit of power settings, so an undervolt. Now we have DRAM information, which is quite useful. You can see exactly what's installed without having to go into the system. So we can see that it's crucial memory, 8 gig module, and we can see its XMP timings and various profiles set up. So that's quite useful. Save having to load CPU Z up and all that. Now we can load the profile if it's got any XMP profiles. This does, so I have. Or you can manually adjust the frequency to anything you wish, which is also very nice. You can also mess with the voltage. You can also mess with the frequency divider, which only to get the best optimization. But most importantly, you can directly adjust the timings of the RAM, which you'd be surprised the amount of boards that don't allow you to do this. But you can edit everything you wish to edit, which is, of course, a plus. Now, here we go. So for the CPU voltage, I knew it would be somewhere. You got the classic offset mode, which you can just add a negative or undervolting or overvolting, or fixed voltage. Offset is much better because it allows the CPU to manage its own voltage just with the offset. Now this is some automatic calibration, so it's currently set to level 4, which allows it to control its own voltage where it needs to, which is related to the offset. The sock voltage, once again you have full control. You can offset or you can do fixed, and once again it's auto management. You also have additional voltages for the VPPM, the VDDP, the plus 1.8 voltage, which I'm not entirely sure what that's for. You got the RAM voltage and the chipset voltage. And what's always nice is you can save profiles in here, which isn't always a thing, and you can load them off a USB. So if you want to save them externally and wipe the BIOS, you can restore your settings afterwards, which is really great. Let's just put that back to auto, since I don't know what that will do without testing it. But yeah, that's all the settings that are available. As you can see, there isn't a TDP setting, unless I've missed it. And so again, external voltages. So to achieve the TDP of 45 watt, it would have to be manually done. which is a shame. I'll update the BIOS now and we'll have another look to see if it has appeared, but it seems to be we are limited to just the default 65 watt of this APU, which is a shame, because I know some of the mid-range boards before had that option, but you know, it might be important to some people, it's important to me. It's a shame that it's not here, but let's go and update the BIOS and have a look if it appears. Here we are after the update. Let's quickly load defaults. Yes. Okay. Let's have a quick look around then, see if anything has changed. Ah, that's new. Smart shift, no idea what that is. Ah, there we go. This is what I was after. So now under the SMU, so where are we? So if we go into AMD CBS in advanced, NVIO common options, we now have a new option called SMU common options, which has this smart shift control, which is interesting. It's but auto. But the most important thing here is this system configuration AM4, which is allowing system configuration of 65 watts, 45 and 35, which is what I wanted this to do. So we have access to all of this stuff, which is what I would want. So I'm just guessing that the initial version of this BIOS was missing various features, and at a glance it does seem that is the case. Ah, very good. So you can enable each individual. Yeah, that was there before. I just missed it off. Ah, that was one thing that was missing. There is LED headers on there, but we now have access to it inside the BIOS, which seems to contain the same settings Yeah, it does seem to. Ah, very good. Applies to all channels. So that would include the RAM and the headers. Well, I'm quite happily surprised about that. Yeah, so we have all the options that I would expect from a B550M motherboard. Just remember to update your BIOS to 1.1 at least, and you should get all the options that you wish. Now here's a question: have we gotten the better fan? Maybe I'm going to do that because that's the same as... Why do you say that? Let's have a quick look, shall we? Can we set it to nothing? It would appear we can. Let's apply that. Let's go back. Unfortunately, it doesn't seem to have actually done what I wanted it to do, but okay, fine. We kind of already knew that, so stick with silence. Now, last but not least, let's have a look at the software that comes bundled on the disc. Here we have ASRock's app shop, as they call it. It allows you to install some of their software, so the motherboard utility and the LED fans. It's supposed to allow you to upgrade and update drivers and BIOS settings, well, BIOS file, but unfortunately, for whatever reason, doesn't matter what server I select, it does not seem to want to find any updates or any data at all, so this clearly doesn't seem to work, but it does allow you to install some software if needed. Now let's take a look at the tuning software and the LED software, but let's first look at the LED software. It has to perform a firmware update of some description on first load, so it takes, well, it took a few minutes to load in the first place, but once loaded, we get to have a look at what's available, which is pretty much the same as what's in the BIOS anyway. It just gives you a nice interface to edit it and a nice colour wheel to pick the colours. So currently I haven't got any RGB stuff installed. I might come back and look at it if people wish to see how it works. I do have a Cooler Master RGB controller, so I can use that to have a play around with this. Okay, so let's have a look at the ASRock tuning software. It seems to offer exactly the same settings as the BIOS. The only difference is you can set up some profiles and a hotkey. So if you wish to have it set to, let's say, an underclocked, undervolted setting most of the time, but then you want to have an overclock setting when you're playing a game or using some software, you can set a hotkey to control the overclock and turn it on and off from Windows itself, which is quite useful, saves you having to reboot. But other than that, it seems to contain exactly the same settings as the BIOS. So the fan settings, system info, it all the same. So if you don't need the ability to toggle overclocks on and off, there's not much point in actually installing this software. Now for the SSD, you can see that it does hit the level it's meant to hit, so it's not limited or performing oddly. So you could put a very fast NVMe SSD in here and get the performance you would expect. So just using the onboard GPU, we can see that even with modern games, this isn't exactly a hard to run game. It's Rogue Company, it's a team-based shooter, very fun to play. It runs very well, of course not at the highest frame rate, but perfectly playable, especially just from onboard graphics, and it looks pretty nice. So with how much the CPU and motherboard cost, the performance I've found has been well beyond my expectations. The board has performed very well. The only issue I've had with it is not being able to set the fans to not spin under idle conditions, which is not a deal breaker, but it's a massive shame. After a BIOS update, we could configure the CPU to go to 45 and 35 watt, which was exactly what I wanted. It has all the basic features that you'd want from a motherboard if it's in a small package. So you got your M.2 slot, you've got gigabit Ethernet, you have 4 SATA ports, you can do RAID, you have the ability to have PCI Express 4 if you have the right CPU. It has everything you need, and even if you wish to have red, green, blue headers and some RGB lighting and stuff like that, you're fine. You got everything you need, and all for only just over £100. Much better deal than the gaming version that's available, which has all these features plus faster networking and some onboard LEDs. You're much better off buying this one, I think. Just be aware that you are limited to Zen 2 CPUs and above, so you can't use anything from Zen or Zen Plus, so that means only 3000 and 4000/5000 CPUs and 4000 version APUs, sorry. So you're limited in what you can pick. So if you've got an older CPU, you can't use this board, and if you've got a newer CPU, you can't just put that into an older board. So it's a bit of a complete mess from AMD, I think, from this point of view, but it's what's happened, so you have to deal with it. I would have preferred maybe a different socket at that point to avoid the confusion. I know everyone gets a bit annoyed about having new sockets and having to buy a new board, but you've got to buy a new board anyway. It's just, it has the same socket, which just adds confusion. So yeah, certainly if you're looking for a small motherboard, I would certainly recommend picking this up for the AM44 platform. So that's all I have to say on it for today. If you liked the video, please leave a comment below, thumbs up, and please subscribe. While this is still only a small channel, I'm trying to get to the 1,000 subscriber mark so I can actually monetize this channel, just so we can cover its costs. more than anything, and just just to make it a little bit easier so I can bring you newer stuff and not have to skimp and save and cut corners. So please like, please comment, and please subscribe if you can. So thanks. See you next time. Goodbye.
What goes around, partner?
I got the objective.
45 seconds remaining. Bomb defused. Mission accomplished.